Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show. Jim Marty reporting from Longmont, Colorado. And I've got my partner up in Chicago, Larry Mishkin. How you doing, Larry?
Jim, I'm doing just great. Thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you and be able to spend a little bit of time talking about two of our favorite things to talk about. Things are going well here in Chicago. We're starting to dip out of the nice, warm, sunny weather and into the more overcast, cold weather. But I guess that we're within spitting distance of Thanksgiving, so that seems a little bit appropriate by this time, unfortunately. And we're ready to do that. Jim, we're really lucky today because we've now had our show on enough that we're finally at a point where, enough time has gone by, we can bring back prior guests that we've had, especially those guests who we found to be really entertaining and informative and like-minded as you and I are. And one of those is our good friend Rob Hunt, who's calling in today from right outside San Diego. Rob, how you doing?
I'm great. And I didn't realize until just now that I'm your first repeat guest. So I'm absolutely honored that I get the dubious distinction.
Absolutely. No, we're happy to have you come back, and we loved our talk last time, and even just in the 5 minutes of warm up here, we quickly discovered that we could create enough content to talk all day. So before I do this, why don't we dive back into Rob and give you 30 seconds to update us and our listeners on where you're at and what you're doing.
Sure. I'm back in Carlsbad, California after spending a couple months in the Northeast with my children in school on a tiny little island where we're COVID-free and safe, but we've now made our way back to the West Coast and kind of back into isolation with lots of time to listen to music and articulate our thoughts on paper as to what's happening in the cannabis industry.
I love that. That works out very well. Rob, in one of his former lives, was worked with a VC group, and they looked at a number of different marijuana investment opportunities. And for a while, Rob, I remember you told us that you had had some communications with the Garcia family and Trixie and some of them in early conversations to roll out some Jerry branded cannabis products. And now we actually have them. They've hit the market recently. Have you had a chance to see them?
I have. Yeah, they look terrific, and I'm super excited for the family, and I'm super excited for Josh Henderson and the whole holistic team to have made this a reality and get those products off the ground. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what else they drop.
Yeah, typical for what you would expect for Jerry. I saw in the I don't know where I saw it on one of the web pages I was on. I mean, the packaging is, artistic and everything. It's, it's really kind of like a full visual experience, full whatever. And have you had a chance to try it yet?
I have not. No. I've seen probably what you've seen, which is all the packaging, all the different looks and feels to what they're doing. But no, I've not yet come across it in person.
Okay. And so that makes him the second, right? Mickey already has his line out.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've got Mickey and Jerry. Any of the other guys that you know of thinking or contemplating?
Not that I know of. The understanding that I had is, the Grateful Dead was very excited to do something, but they hadn't come to terms on figuring out who they wanted to launch a Grateful Dead product line with. And so Mickey kind of jumped the gun and decided that I'm going to put something out independently. And he did his short joints line. But the Garcia family, as you know, is independent of the Grateful Dead, despite the fact that, Trixie still sits on the board of the band. And, she's essentially the sixth band member for decision-making purposes. But the Garcia estate did something completely different than, what the Grateful Dead is doing. It's two completely different management teams and two completely different legal teams and everything else. So the expectation is that if there is anything else coming out from the Dead, it'll be the Grateful Dead as a group together and not another individual band member.
Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is Bob Weir left the world of using marijuana many decades ago.
That I don't know. And I have to tell you, I don't know how much you know about that, Rob, but that was always one of our, favorite discussions before, after a show, sitting at home listening to whatever we were listening to. Who in the band gets high, and how often do they get high, and do they get high on stage? And when Jerry's sitting there smoking in between songs, what is he really smoking? And and part of it, I think, was always just kind of the fun of imagining and not really knowing one way or the other. And for me, the almost bigger question is how many of them were, or even to this day, still dosing when they go out and play. And I've heard all sorts of rumors about that, but nothing that I would, put any stock in necessarily, other than, again, just excited deadheads, liking to repeat whatever they think they heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And to my knowledge, what Jerry was smoking on stage was always Pall Mall on filters. So I don't think there's really much more than that. And, there's times that you obviously see him light up and put it on his speaker stack or some monitor stack in between between songs, take a drag or two, and then go back and start, playing the next tune.
And it's funny, so that it is tobacco, and which is fine. We all, of course, were imagining he was getting stoned, but you may, or I don't know if I've ever told you the story, Rob. I know that I've shared the story with our listeners, and I'm just mentioning it here really quickly. In the early 1970s, my father was an orthopedic surgeon. We went to Las Vegas for a conference, and I got to see Elvis Presley, and I saw him at the Hilton Ballroom, and it was tremendous. But one of the things that I remembered all night was that he kept having drinks in between the songs. And I thought, wow, this is Elvis, man. He's up there and he's having, and later on, of course, we found out that it was, non-alcoholic drinks. Whatever he was drinking was fruit juice or whatever kind of, and it was almost like it felt a lot better when I thought he was really drinking, just like, when I always imagined Jerry was sitting there smoking a joint before he turned around and played a Hot Morning Dew, but maybe it was just taking a drag off the cigarette.
Yeah. Funny you bring up Elvis, because for me, almost everything I know about Elvis is because of the Garcia band. Whether it's That's All Right Mama or Don't Let Go. There's a lot of songs that, even Elvis didn't actually write, but covered that, I only learned about because the Garcia band covered those songs as well.
Well, at least in one of the iterations of the Garcia band, Ron Tutt was the drummer, and he had been Elvis's drummer.
Yeah.
They actually brought him over, and for me,
and Donna was a backup singer.
Right, and Donna was the backup singer. You raise an interesting point, because I've sat down. My kids are just getting to an age where they like the Dead, but they really have taken a real fascination in early classic rock and roll. And as I go back through my collection with them of non-Dead stuff, I'm always amazed at how many bands I get to, and I'm like, well, I got here because the Dead covered them, so I started listening to them.
Yeah.
And there's so much music, and even bands that I knew, like the Beatles. They took me to songs of the Beatles that I had never heard before or never really paid attention to. And Tomorrow Never Knows is a great tune, and I'm sure I listened to it, but I never really listened to it until they did it.
Yeah, that's a great segue to even talking about the new Dave's Picks coming out. And when you think about just what the first set of that first night looks like, the first song is a Wilson Pickett tune, In the Midnight Hour. CC Rider being kind of traditional. Let's see, Desolation Row being a Dylan tune, and Promised Land being a Chuck Berry song. It's the Dead opened up so many doors into different bands or different music. I would have never known who Wilson Pickett was, but for the Midnight Hour.
Right, exactly.
It's a great Desolation Row. Bob gets all the lyrics, all 15 verses, gets them all right.
And then forgets the lyrics to Truckin'.
Yeah, that's what's the old joke is, how does Bob get Desolation Row completely correct and still messes up Truckin'?
Right. Right. I was always, because it wasn't just Desolation Row. He was doing that, and he was doing Memphis Blues again.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was doing Queen Jane approximately, and he was interchanging them all on a regular basis, and he used to nail them all night after night.
In Memphis Blues, there's a lot of lyrics in that song.
A lot of lyrics. Yeah, that's true. It just kind of goes on. And that was back in the day before they had, the convenience they all have now of the little video screen that they throw up in front of them so they can, turn to any song on the fly and play it, of course. But that's true. Just all the different, avenues it took me into, and then, and then you just slide off into other side areas off of that. And, before you know it, you've covered a big chunk of, the rock and roll genre.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the second set from that same night, I'm looking at it right now, had a Young Rascals tune in Good Lovin', another Dylan tune with Mighty Quinn, another Chuck Berry tune with Round and Round.
Yep.
That's I Know Your Rider being a great true American traditional song. So there's just a handful of things that were, in any given night, probably half the songs you were listening to were cover songs, if the Dead were the ones that made it famous.
Right.
So it's,
we talk about all the cowboy songs, right? Big River and Me and My Uncle and any of those tunes, which were all, traditional Western tunes. And they took it and I'll tell you the one that I loved and they only played it for a very short period of time was Sing Me Back Home, which they did in the early 1970s, a Merle Haggard tune, and then they just kind of dropped it for some reason. But that's a beautiful tune, and Jerry would nail it.
Oh yeah, what a heartstring evoking tune that is of the last request of an inmate going to be put to death.
Right.
Exactly. And allegedly a true story. When Merle actually spent time in prison, that was what he was asked by one of the guys who was walking down death row.
Oh, that I hadn't heard. That's very interesting.
I heard that. Yep. Okay. Mama Tried, another Merle Haggard song.
Right. Yeah. But I just loved all that, because, here in the midst of it, and these were, if you ask your, typical Deadhead who may not know any better, oh yeah, those are all Grateful Dead tunes. And that's because the Dead have taken them and they've made them their own, and they've incorporated them into their set, so much that we all just take it for granted that it is their music. And, my all-time favorite statistic about the Grateful Dead is that the number one most played song was Me and My Uncle by a lot, by like 100 shows almost. And it just always amazed me, whatever. Me and My Uncle, it's a good tune. It's a snappy, it moves along. But for Bobby, it was obviously like a great filler, and he just went to it a lot.
It was also the shortest song, clocking in on average about 2 minutes and 1 second. Right, so exactly. It was a great thing that could pop into any set. Just to when you're doing the combo of two cowboy tunes in a row, whether it was that in Mama Tried or that in Big River or that in El Paso, you could always put it together really fast. It's just a filler song.
No doubt about it.
Desolation Row. I always liked it when the Grateful Dead did Bob Dylan songs because, number one, you can understand the lyrics. Bob always did a great job with the lyrics. Mm-hmm. But God, how many characters from American folklore are mentioned in Desolation Row? Einstein and the list goes on.
Cinderella,
yeah.
Well, that's why I feel like Ramble on Rose also. Right. Ramble on Rose, all sorts of characters from American folklore.
Absolutely. Yep. And U.S. blues. And they touched on a lot of this stuff over time. It's, it's fun. You can really put together an interesting list of characters that the Grateful Dead sing about.
Yep. And before we move on from Dave's picks from 1987, that's March of 87, right? Hartford, Connecticut. Yep. One of the best Tennessee Jeds I think I've ever heard, with a terrific jam to end it.
Look, I have to tell you, 87, in my opinion, was a great time for them, right? Jerry was coming back from his first diabetic coma, and he was, at least for a while, going through a period of, healthy living and everything else. And I think they had a lot of energy at that time. I think there was a lot of, invigoration. Jerry was back. The band was rolling along. And, a lot of those tunes from that time are classic. And that's why I'm very excited to see that, Dave has finally dipped into the 80s. And, the thing about this that always cracks me up about Dave, of course, is that Dave saw his first show in like 89 or 90. He's Canadian. And I've listened to him talk about it. He didn't even start seeing them until 89 or 90. And he has this total, infatuation with the 70s, which I love the 70s, but they did a lot of great work in the 80s, and even some of the early 90s. There's good moments along the way.
Well, and the funny part is what they released for this 2-disc set or 4-disc set is as quintessential 87 as it comes. Right. If you think about a set list that would typify 87, when you've got a Brother Esau and Push Comes to Shove, and Alabama Getaway. These are at West LA Fadeaway. These are all songs that you expect to pop up into an 87 set list.
Exactly.
So, if you're going to pull one that doesn't, kind of represent like a 70s set list in the 80s, this is as 87 as it comes.
Yep. No, I would agree. And that's true. Is that you got to be careful, because, and they've released a lot of that. They released a while back that, the playing as formerly the Warlocks from Hampton, Virginia in 1989. And it was a great show, but it almost sounded like, a 70s show because of they had a lot of early stuff and a lot of
Dark Star and Addicts.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
yes,
they mix all that up and have some fun with it.
I'm enjoying it very much.
Well, we can talk about this all day, and maybe we still will, but there's a couple of things I really wanted to touch on with you, Rob, while we have you. First of all, we've been talking just a minute ago about the Jerry brand, but right before we went on, you were mentioning, and Jim was echoing the new brand that Carlos Santana has come out with. And apparently he did a big presentation yesterday. Is that something you can tell us about?
Yeah, well, I spoke at a conference yesterday that's part of the NCIA conference. So it's the Cannabis conference is the part that, kind of kicks it off. So I spoke on a panel on that. So I was able to get access to, a lot of the other speakers. I'm guessing Jim might have been a speaker at that thing as well. And, it was nice to see they had two keynotes. Andrew Yang was one that's happening today, and the other one was Carlos, which happened yesterday. It was really Carlos's take on just kind of, how he sees the world and how he views, his role in it. And now that Carlos has got a cannabis brand out as well, which I think we all kind of expected at some point we might see. It was good to see an icon that has really been important to cannabis culture now come back full circle and actually take a role as a keynote speaker at a conference.
Yes, I really enjoyed his talk yesterday. Our pre-recorded presentation will be tomorrow on some tax and accounting issues with Nick Richards and Rachel Gillette of Green Spoon Martyr. And so it's a cyber event, of course. But back to Carlos. Yeah, I thought he gave a great talk, really talking about his spiritual side and how people trust him. And when he goes into business with people, which he's done many times, I guess with sunglasses and shoes and clothing. His comment that I took away from his talk yesterday was trust makes thrust. That if you trust somebody, you can get a lot of thrust and get a lot of things done. So I really like that saying. And he was wearing a Listen to Miles Davis t-shirt. It was kind of funny.
Carlos always did that kind of stuff. One of his albums, I remember on the picture on the inside on the fold, he was wearing a St. Louis Blues hockey jersey, which always struck me as odd. But he gets into that kind of stuff, so it all's fine with me.
Well, I think anyone that's a Grateful Dead fan, we have to respect Carlos just by the fact that, Bill Graham's two favorite guys to put on stage in the late 60s at the Fillmore were the Grateful Dead and Carlos Santana.
Absolutely.
And, those are the two people that really blew him away. And if anyone hasn't gotten a chance to see Jerry and Carlos play together, Google it. There's a couple times they've played some tunes that, the trading of licks are just unreal between the two of them.
And of course, now you can do that while enjoying one of Carlos's products and get the whole Santana experience.
Yeah.
Or you put a vape cart of Garcia's and a vape cart of Santana's into a double barrel and mix it up.
Even better. So here, that was the other question about this I wanted to ask you, Rob, and see if you had any insight on it. We've now got a Mickey Hart brand. We got a Jerry brand. Is it just a matter of time, you think, before we see a Billy brand or a Bobby brand, or are we done with the individuals there?
I think more likely than not, we're done with the individuals. And I think very likely the next one is, whoever comes together to put out a Grateful Dead brand. And I think it's only a question of time.
Okay. I mean, it would seem inevitable, wouldn't it? That, as much fun as it is to have a Jerry brand or a Mickey brand, to have a pre-rolled joint, like with a skull and roses on it would be pretty cool.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay. Well, that's the beauty of this industry, is that there's a lot of celebrities out there who like to get stoned, and, money is money. So if they can find a good opportunity to do it, you can have all sorts of good stuff.
The question remains, though, how much utility, though, is there in the celebrity brand? You look at, probably the arguably most successful celebrity brand out there right now is Cookies, through Burner. And, Burner's not nearly as big a name in the music industry, but, for street cred around Los Angeles, he certainly has it. And he certainly has dedicated his life to the cannabis industry as far as, singing about cannabis, talking about cannabis. So, do a lot of the more nostalgic people that, we're huge fans of their music, are they as relevant to the people that are using cannabis today? Or is just a really great top-notch brand that's not celebrity endorsed even more important for the long term? And I would argue that, it's great to see people's names attached to these things, and they're a great way to have some advertising and marketing when that's not really available in the cannabis industry. But is it, really what drives sales? And I'm still not convinced that it is, though I do love to see the artists that have kind of paved the way for the industry get their recognition and be able to make a little bit of money on the back end.
Well, that I absolutely agree with, but I think that then we have to start drawing distinctions between some of those people, and this is going to get me in trouble for saying this in Chicago, but when one of the recent greenhouse adult use dispensaries opened here, it was all centered around the Blues Brothers, because they were going to be the only dispensary in Illinois carrying the Blues Brothers brand, and they had Jim Belushi come out in the original Blues Brothers mobile, and whatever. I guess if you're a nostalgia buff for that kind of thing, it was okay, but that doesn't really scream cannabis to me.
Nah.
Well,
Yeah.
the big point I would make on all of this celebrity branding is you still can't cross state lines. So
Right.
the Willie Nelson you buy in Colorado is not going to be the same exact Willie Nelson you get in California because it's going to be grown locally.
Yeah.
The strains are not going to be as consistent. And the example I always use, and people have heard me say it on the show, is Marlboro cigarettes. You get them anywhere in the world; they're pretty much all the same, but not so with cannabis.
But to that point, Jim, I think it depends on which brand. And there's some brands that just slap their name on a box and say that the packaging is consistent, but nothing else is. I helped get the Willie's brand off the ground, and we were the first dollars into that brand when we funded it back in 2015. And I'll say that team has done a really nice job of curating very small boutique growers that adhere to a very specific ethos that they have. So I wouldn't say that they're as inconsistent as others. Your point's well taken. They can't cross state lines, but they can certainly say, let's start with the same genetics and let's start with the same growing methodology to make sure that we're doing as best as we possibly can to keep the relative humidity and the temp and everything else the same in the room, so we can say this is as consistent as we can possibly be without crossing state lines. And I've given the Willie's team a tremendous amount of credit for the way that they've gone after the consistency part of this.
Right. Larry and I have talked about that. We call it, when a new state comes online, the Immaculate Conception. So you can cross state lines with mature flower. Many clones and many seeds will get an industry started where there was no industry before.
Yeah, I've always used the same term, Jim, and it was only recently that I realized that I was always completely wrong about what the Immaculate Conception meant. I never realized that was, not Mary conceiving Jesus. It was Mary as being born without original sin. So the whole idea of, the Immaculate Conception for cannabis, it truly isn't even a proper analogy, although that's what we've all been saying for years.
Well, I'm going to stay out of the religious side of it, but I will take your word for it, Rob, because if anybody would know you,
I never knew it, Larry. Like I always assumed that everyone thought the same thing, but I never realized it until I watched someone point it out. I think it was Chris Cuomo pointing it out to Matt Gaetz in an interview, and I was like, wait, that can't be right. And then I looked it up. I was like, my goodness, like Cuomo was spot on calling him out for mischaracterizing the Immaculate Conception.
Unbelievable. Okay, well, see, we learn something new every day on this show, so that's even better.
Hey, that's what I'm here for.
Attention Cannabis Podcast listeners. You can now listen to your favorite cannabis podcast ad-free with the MJBulls mobile app. Just download the free MJBulls mobile app to your smartphone to start enjoying cannabis podcasts with no commercials. Go to Apple Apps or Google Play to get the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast app today.
One of the things I really want to talk to you about right now, and it's a topic that's out there. It's a huge topic in the cannabis space. People all know about it, but nobody understands it. And hopefully you can help shed some light on. That is this lovely set of interim rules that the DEA just slapped on us not too long ago. I will say, just as a quick disclaimer, that there's already a multi-party lawsuit that's been filed against it. The Hoban Law Group is one of a number of firms that are representing the people who are challenging the rule. But having said that, I would still like to get your input on this in terms of what you can tell us about it and what your involvement has been with it.
Sure. First of all, it's an amazingly complex question. So for those that are listening that don't sort of know what we're talking about, on August 21st, the DEA came out with what they call an IFR, or an interim final rule, that pertain to their interpretation of specific regulatory pieces. And a couple of the ones they went after were with relation to what's defined as marijuana oil. There was a new portion of the Controlled Substances Act that was added in that said, anything that's a marijuana oil has a new coding in the CSA. So the 2018 Farm Bill, as everyone knows, officially legalized hemp, and took hemp out of the Controlled Substances Act altogether.
And all of its cannabinoids.
Yeah, and everything that's contained within it, derivatives, salts, isomers, everything. So in the process, they had to amend the definition of marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act to have a carve-out that said marijuana is defined as, and they gave the full definition. They said, with the exception of anything that's been, proven to be hemp. And then hemp has its own definition through the 2018 Farm Bill. So at that point, that was the first bright line distinction that we had between saying, cannabis that is above 0.03% THC is still technically marijuana, and cannabis that's below 0.03% THC by dry weight is now hemp. So everyone, accepted that as definitionally accurate. Still, anything that was hemp had to be put through the USDA initially, and then the USDA would work in conjunction with the state departments of agriculture to make sure that anything that came down as hemp was properly licensed through the state, and the states had programs in place to guarantee that the U.S. government was satisfied with how they're handling it. And that went along for the last couple of years, and suddenly out of nowhere, the DEA drops this IFR in August that said, okay, that's great, but anything that's derived from hemp, if it pops above 0.03%, which in the industry we refer to as popping hot, would then be recategorized as marijuana oil. Well, okay, that sounds relatively simple, but the problem is it's impossible to extract hemp, like any hemp, that on the first pass of extraction doesn't pop hot. And the thing is that's what we call, work in progress hemp oil or hemp extract, or WIPI is kind of the acronym, or everyone just calls crude, right? So when you talk about, crude has no market except B2B. There is no B2C consumer market for crude oil from hemp. And ultimately that hemp oil gets, refined again into an isolate or a distillate, and then ultimately gets added to products that when they actually enter interstate commerce or commerce in general, the final product is well below the 0.03% THC threshold. So anyone that's been, creating a CBD product, and I mean anyone, is at some point having to start with that first pass extraction, which means that everything that follows from that would be, almost like fruit of the poisonous tree. It's, technically illegal because what you started off with as a base material is an illegal material. So the entire industry said, well, wait a second, there's no way for us to put out a CBD product unless you actually go through this process of extraction. And that first pass extraction to crude is certainly going to pop hot. And most of the states said, look, if you look at our state regulations, we've even put an allowance in there saying, as long as you're not above a certain threshold, we're going to allow for that to be higher than the USDA standard or the FDA standard, as long as the ultimate product that's being sold is not. But the DEA said, oh, no. What we've done is, we're not changing any rules. What we've done is just, simply interpreted the law as written. And, this is no more than us just acting on the law as written. Well, if you look at it, what they've done is it's dicta. It's not the law as written. The law as written was very specific, and Congress has been very specific in saying, no, once it's been deemed hemp, then you're removed, completely carved out from marijuana. You can't then take it and say, now you're being moved back into marijuana. Right? And that's what the DEA is trying to do. So the likelihood of enforcement is really low. But at the same time, if you're an investor in the industry and you're asking your hemp extractor to make reps and warranties to say you're following the letter of the law and you're following the Farm Bill and you haven't done anything that's technically illegal, it would be near impossible to make that rep and warranty as long as this DEA IFR is hanging over your head. So everyone's looking for clarity on this. The reason I got involved in it was, I was asked to be involved in the court case as an expert witness on kind of what the process of extraction is and how it works. And the more I dug into it, the more exciting and more interesting this question became. So, the take that I have on it, and I think the one that's ultimately going to hold the day, is that in 2016, after the 2014 Farm Bill came out, which did not remove hemp from the CSA, the DEA was asked, hey, how come you're still treating, hemp as an illegal product? And they said, well, until Congress, really makes an overt action to remove it from the CSA, we have to continue to treat hemp as marijuana. And so we're not going to change, the way we handle hemp until the Congress, makes the step of saying we removed it from the CSA. We are powerless to do anything more than what Congress allows us. And they're saying that to make it less restrictive. Well, here we are in 2020, where they're now trying to make it more restrictive. And Congress has spoken, and Congress has made their intent clear. And now there's even congressmen and congresswomen that signed on saying, DEA, you're misinterpreting what we did. You guys are forgetting that we truly did make everything related to hemp legal. And every extract that follows, if you look at the language, is legal as well. So, while I don't think that when they wrote that rule, they're ever expecting that extraction was going to allow for, someone to extract fields of hemp and turn it into 100% pure THC isolate, which you theoretically can, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is, people taking hemp, extracting it, removing the THC through a remediation process, and then putting the CBD into products that go into interstate commerce. And I think the DEA's got a real tough road ahead of them. And your firm, Larry, I think is doing a terrific job joining with Vicente Cederberg and a couple others to challenge this ruling on behalf of the American hemp industry, as well as a couple select clients. So really, really interesting question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're very proud. Patrick Goggin and a few of the other guys, Garrett Graff at the Hoban firm, have been working very hard on that, along with Bob. One issue about this, though, because it's a pretty, besides the fact that I love anything that calls itself an interim final rule, which kind of sounds like military intelligence to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other side of this that I'm a little bit concerned about as well is we're seeing a lot of new products coming onto the market. THCA, Delta 8, CBG, a lot of other things that are, in fact, cannabinoids of hemp, and therefore, by definition, under the 2018 Farm Bill, all legal. But of course, what we're all seeing now is that something like Delta 8 may have THC in it. It's not Delta 9 THC. So if you have Delta 8, while it is inert in that state, if you light it, my understanding on this is all very basic. When you light it and it burns, it releases a certain amount of psychoactive substance. And so people have picked up on this, and it's becoming very, very popular. But of course, slowly but surely, the DEA and the government is catching on to it as well. And one of the things at the Hoban firm that we've been concerned about with this issue is how do we kind of balance this? Because on the one hand, in response to the issue of the crude oil, what we're really saying is, hey, look, this is all going to be below 0.3%. This is not psychoactive. This will not have a psychoactive effect on people. Therefore, you shouldn't be considering it as something as such. Whereas with Delta 8, we can't really make that argument, because if somebody buys Delta 8 and they do combust it and smoke it, they are in fact getting a psychoactive effect. That meaning that there is then a THC effect that's produced that's equivalent to something greater than 0.3%. And so you kind of have two different issues tugging at one another here. And the question is that reality potentially damaging to getting people to come on board with the idea that we shouldn't be worrying about crude oil right now because the final product's going to be at a lower level?
Yeah, look, there's a super simple fix to all this that the DEA obviously doesn't want to, take a look at. But ultimately, if you're, to say what's going to happen, if Congress realizes that, extraction is happening that allows for D8 and allows even for D9 to be extracted out of hemp, ultimately that is an issue. And I don't think the intent of Congress ever was to legalize a backdoor to get people high through hemp extraction. But the simple way to handle this is to say, okay, as long as it's been certified as hemp and then sold into an extraction facility, that extraction facility should have to get on a metric-like system that does, a trace that says, okay, from a chain of custody perspective, what are you doing with the byproduct, right? As long as you can say we're destroying the byproduct, then it's a pretty simple issue, and you hold accountable the people that are actually handling it, that say, look, if we're going to take it down to a crude, and then from a crude we're going to do some sort of an isolation, either through creating a fully winterized crude initially and then going into a distillate. From that distillate, and we're separating pieces out, what's going to happen to those pieces, whether it's D8, whether it's D9, or whether it's any other cannabinoid? But as long as it's a psychoactive cannabinoid, they should have to show destruction of that cannabinoid before it leaves into the market. And that would, essentially that would just cause the states to say, we're going to license the specific extractors, which is really a finite number of people out there that are doing it, and saying, you guys have a responsibility to make sure that, you're acting in accordance with our regs, and you can show that whatever you extracted out in D8 or D9 has been destroyed. Other than that, destroying the entire CBD industry, typical baby with the bathwater, alphabet agency stuff, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And I think, ultimately we're going to see a change in the law, but we're not going to see what the DEA is suggesting, because it doesn't make any sense at all.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's very educational.
That is educational. That is helpful, and it's just such an important issue. And for me, it's so very frustrating to see the government so heavily focused on trying to disrupt the CBD market, and maybe part of it's due to a lack of misunderstanding on its part. Maybe part of it's just due to longstanding prejudices that they're just not willing to let go of. But it almost becomes comical these days. And I'm telling some clients, you're almost better off, trying to sell marijuana than you are CBD, the way that they're cracking down on CBD.
Yeah, Look, it's, as I said, it's a complicated question. It's one that I don't think is going away. And I'll tell you that the scientists in this space, whether it's guys that are doing work with taking hemp-derived CBD and converting it to THC through an isometric process, or whether it's guys in the lab that are trying to create yeast-derived cannabinoids, whatever it is, the science is far more advanced than the understanding of the bureaucrats. They're light years behind where we are from scientifically. And if you try to explain to them the technical aspects of extraction and how it works, you've lost them in the first 30 seconds. But for the rest of you out there listening, I wrote a really long white paper on this that's sitting on my LinkedIn profile that's called "The DEA Got It Wrong Again." So if any of you want to take a deeper dive on this, it's waste 20 or 30 minutes of your life, go ahead and take a look at that paper, and you'll get a pretty good, well-rounded view of exactly what the issue is and how it's being addressed, and ultimately what I think the legal result will be.
Fantastic.
And my point would be, doesn't all this go away if marijuana itself is decriminalized or normalized at some point? I mean, we just saw Mississippi go with a medical marijuana program on this last Tuesday's election. Do you see anything on the horizon when the new Congress is seated in January?
No. Simple answer. Unless we have a huge blowout in Georgia on January 5th, and McConnell loses his seat. First we have to get through the certification process with the presidency, which I think everyone's expecting will end up in Biden's favor. But after that, all eyes are on Georgia on January 5th, and just because Biden won Georgia in the presidential election, it's still a pretty heavy lift to get across the line to unseat Loeffler and Perdue. So I think smart money is expecting that McConnell's going to sit in the speaker's role or Senate Majority Leader's role. And if he does, do I see any major pieces of legislation getting to his desk, or even getting out of committee? I think relatively unlikely. The good news is the Senate map looks much more favorable in 2022, and this might be fleeting. It might be 2 more years of waiting. But state by state, Jim, what you just said is spot on. Mississippi just went and didn't go barely. It went 2/3 of the vote in Mississippi. So,
and not only that, they chose a more open form of medical. They had 2 choices: one for just like people who were really, really, truly sick, and one that would, more generally just for. And they went with the much more open, liberal one. I was really surprised to see that too.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're going to look at a bellwether, if name a more conservative state in the union, you're not going to get one more conservative than Mississippi. So, if you're looking at this going, okay, what is, let's put our finger in the wind and take a pulse here of what's happening. There's no doubt that you put it on the ballot in this country, it's passing at this point. It doesn't matter where it is passing. Yes. So ultimately, does Congress have to look at this and say, we need to start thinking about it? I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that it's going to take New York, Pennsylvania, and Florida to go to adult use. And when we do, then I think it's game over. I don't think there's any further holding back the tide.
I agree. We're not quite there yet, but we're close to game over. New Jersey is going to get New York's full attention.
Absolutely.
There'll be a lot of, I guess, what the politicians call leakage with New York cannabis in New Jersey. And there's a very good possibility that New York could get adult use through the legislature and not through the ballot.
Well, I think Cuomo just came out and said that he's looking at, starting the process again. But for COVID, I think we'd already be there in New York. And everyone knew that Murphy was going to pass it in Jersey. And everyone knows that Wolf was going to, plan on passing it in Pennsylvania. And by the way, if you look at the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, that guy's number one issue is cannabis policy. I think it's John Fetterman's his name. And Fetterman's terrific, and very likely he's the next governor of Pennsylvania. So we're not far off on this whole thing, because you now have people that are in positions of power that aren't just supporting it; they're running on it. Wolf ran on it, Murphy ran on it.
Right.
Yeah, it's real issues now. I agree, absolutely. And I recognize your comment about McConnell, being in charge of the flow of legislation in the Senate. But, one of the things that Jim and I always like to talk about and kind of get a chuckle about is, and you just pointed it out too. I mean, this is the most contentious presidential election in the history of the world. And we have Senate seats that haven't even been resolved yet, and everybody's fighting and screaming and yelling. And meanwhile, cannabis, no issue. I mean, it passed by such a wide margin. It's like the one thing in this country that everybody really agrees on. And I continue to press it and say, the next time, you're walking down the street and you got the Trumpers on one side and the Biden crazies on the other side, just pull out a joint and let them all get stoned together. And I think within a few minutes, everybody will just be hanging out, having a good old time.
It is certainly a unifying factor. There's no doubt at this point, and even on a municipal level, you look at California, where I am. Everyone says, "Oh, California's adult use legal," and my answer is, "Well, not so fast. It's legal in the state, but every town has the ability to opt in or opt out."
Right.
But if you look at how many towns opted in as of this last election, even in San Diego County, where I am, and we just watched Encinitas and Oceanside go, and that's meaningful. That's going to force all the other towns around. It's going to force my town of Carlsbad to have to rethink it when we're surrounded on either side now by tax revenue that's going to our neighbors. And that's how it happens. It's not just on the state level; it's on the municipal level as well. And that's why if we're talking elections, I can't stress enough that your local elections make such a huge difference in what your quality of life is and what you're able to do. And they also influence ultimately what the state elections will do. It's not about just the national elections. I highly encourage everyone out there to vote at every election they get a chance to cast their vote and be heard.
Well, that's certainly an issue on this election cycle. More people voted, I think, than ever before.
By far. I mean, when it's all said and done, Biden's going to get almost 80 million votes. The record before was what Clinton got in 2016, and that was 65 million. They're going to eclipse it by almost 20 plus million voters that have never voted in a presidential election in a combined vote. It's crazy how many people came out to vote.
And Trump, I think they said, is going to set the record for the most votes received for a candidate who loses the popular vote.
He'll be number 2 overall, Larry. He'll eclipse what Obama got in 2008. So number 1 and number 2 will be in this election, the winner and the loser. I mean, Trump is going to end up with 74 million votes by the time it's all counted. That's, we've never seen, no winners ever gotten 73 or 74.
It really is amazing that, I suppose that this, if we need to take a silver lining out of these contentious times, is if it really has, motivated people to take an interest in politics and to pay attention to what's going on and to get themselves out to the polls. Because as you point out, Rob, once they're standing there in the polling booth, if they get pulled there by the president, that's great. But now there's a whole other list of things for them to pay attention to and to participate in. And that's really the key. So I think it's great. We get these big turnouts, and, hopefully that speaks for as much of a majority of Americans as we can have.
I was going to say the best we can hope for right now is that, with the divided government, that people have to come back together. They have to unify a little bit, and hopefully this gets, the country healing a bit, because right now this is unsustainable as we're going forward. And as, the Grateful Dead said, this darkness got to give.
Amen.
Way to come to the end of our time slot, which I want to just tell one quick story from Colorado, which, at 11 years now, we've had legal cannabis, adult use since 2014. And a group of us, clients and people in the industry, were having dinner last week, the night after the election, and people are telling their stories of how, black and blue and bruised they are and the things they've gone through over the last 10 years, the stories they have to tell of partnerships that have failed and leases and landlords and zoning and real estate deals. And we all looked at each other and said, you know what, though? We built a $2.2 billion industry from scratch. I mean, it was already there, granted, but a $2.2 billion legal industry in 10 years. And I think that's something all of us here in Colorado can be very proud of.
Really, they're in everywhere, and I like to think of it as it's not even so much really building the industry, because you're right. I mean, this is the only time in history we're going to have a new industry that already exists. It's completely in place. We're just literally flipping the switch and saying you're moving from, the shadows out into the sun, and yeah, but the early guys, who got it started definitely set the example for the rest of the country. And, now if only Illinois could just get with the program and finally announce the winners after 10 months, we'd all be really happy.
Well, I think that's the end of our time slot. Rob, thank you. Rob Hunt, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Larry, great job from Chicago.
Thank you.
Why don't you sign us off?
I will indeed. First of all, Rob, as always, thanks, man. It's great to have you on the show. It's always great to catch up. You are the honored first repeat guest, and at the rate you're going, we'll probably have you back again sometime soon. It's always a pleasure to hear what you have to say. To all of our listeners, hope now that the election is over, regardless of what side you're on, you can catch your breath a little bit, relax, and put on some good Grateful Dead and enjoy your marijuana responsibly. Thanks, folks.